Dust swirled across the desert shooting range as the announcer called her name. Her competitors smirked. Her rifle's stock was cracked, the scope slightly bent from a training accident. Whispers spread through the crowd. She's finished. But as the next target soared into the sky, a tiny, fast-moving drone almost impossible to hit, she steadied her breathing, closed one eye, and pulled the trigger. What happened next silenced the whole arena. The sun hung low over the Nevada desert, turning the sand and steel of the shooting range into shimmering gold. A hot wind carried the smell of gun oil and grit across the sprawling compound. At the far end of the field, banners flapped with military logos, and loudspeakers blared instructions for the next event. This was no weekend competition. It was the International Tactical Marksmanship Championship, the most prestigious contest for elite shooters, military units, and contractors from around the world. Her name was Alyssa Ward. At 23, Alyssa had been a state-level champion in precision shooting, but had never been on such a global stage. She was an unassuming figure in her sand-colored tactical jacket, her brown hair tied back in a low braid, eyes hidden behind polarized lenses. She looked like she belonged in a quiet hunting cabin rather than a high-stakes arena where reputations and contracts were made. Yet she'd earned her place. Alyssa had been shooting since she was 10, when her father, a retired Army sniper, began teaching her how to line up a shot using old rifles they rebuilt together in their garage. Good shooters buy their skills, he'd tell her. Great shooters build them. She had practiced in rain, snow, and scorching heat, learning to compensate for warped barrels, stiff triggers, and broken optics. By the time she turned 18, she could hit a moving can with iron sights at 200 yards. She was relentless, but quiet about it. As she stood in the prep area, competitors eyed her with curiosity. Some were curious because she was the youngest in the field. Others smirked openly because she was a woman. A few offered backhanded encouragement. "Better hope they go easy on you," one of the older shooters said, sliding a shiny new scope onto his rifle. Alyssa just smiled thinly and checked the screws on her rifle stock. It was her father's old Remington 700, custom fit but patched in several places, a museum piece compared to the $10,000 carbines around her. Yet to her, it was home. The announcer's voice boomed over the PA system. "Competitors, 5 minutes to inspection. Please bring your weapons to the check table." Alyssa slung her rifle over her shoulder and walked to the line. A cluster of men already waited, their rifles gleaming with carbon fiber stocks, digital wind calculators, and holographic sights. Cameras from a streaming service hovered nearby to capture pre-competition footage for the live broadcast. As the inspector ran his hands over Alyssa's weapon, he frowned. "Stock looks stressed," he said. "You aware of this crack?" "Yes," Alyssa said. "I repaired it last month." He tapped the hairline fracture near the trigger guard. "Might be a problem." Before she could answer, a burst of laughter came from two competitors nearby. "Broken before the match even starts," one snickered. "Maybe she should borrow my kid's BB gun." Alyssa didn't rise to the bait. She simply nodded and continued the inspection. But inside her stomach tightened. The crack had spread slightly during travel. She hadn't noticed it until now. Worse, the scope's alignment looked off after baggage handling at the airport. She'd planned to recalibrate it before the competition, but the clock had run out. The inspector handed it back. "It passes for now, but you're shooting with a handicap." "I've done it before," Alyssa said evenly, though her heart thudded. Out on the firing line, the crowd settled into bleachers built around the arena. Vendors sold drinks and souvenirs. Military recruiters handed out brochures. Screens displayed the live rankings of shooters from countries as far as Norway, Brazil, and Japan. A commentator hyped up the audience. "Remember, folks," he said into his headset mic, "this is the last elimination round before the grand finale. Targets today will be faster, harder, and at unpredictable angles. Only the top 10 move on." Alyssa took her place on lane 19. The sand under her boots radiated heat. She wiped sweat from her palms and adjusted the rifle's strap across her shoulder. The competitors to her left and right adjusted their scopes and exchanged smirks. "You sure you're ready?" asked the man on her left, a tall contractor with a beard and mirrored sunglasses. "That thing looks like it came out of a pawn shop." Alyssa looked him straight in the eye. "It shoots straight enough," she said. She had learned long ago to turn doubt into fuel. She closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the noise of the crowd, the smell of sweat and oil, the sun glaring off polished metal. In her mind, she pictured the forest near her childhood home, the wind rustling through pine trees, the sound of her father's calm voice. Breathe. Line up. Don't think about the crowd. Trust your math. Trust your hands. When the starter horn blew, she was ready. The first round began with stationary targets at 200 yards. Alyssa's hands moved almost automatically. Load, breathe, squeeze. Despite the misaligned scope, she compensated with subtle adjustments, aiming slightly off-center, letting instinct guide her. The first shot rang out. Bullseye. She fired again and again until the magazine clicked empty. When the score flashed on the board, she was tied for 4th place. A murmur rose from the crowd. The commentators took note. "That's Alyssa Ward," one said. "The youngest competitor here, and she's using what looks like a patched-up hunting rifle. But look at that accuracy." Her neighboring competitors glanced at her, their smirks fading. By the end of the second round, moving targets at 300 yards, she was still in the top 10. Her breathing technique and ability to adjust compensated for the weapon's flaws. Each time she fired, she felt the rifle's recoil like a familiar handshake, but she also felt the crack under her grip widening, the scope wobbling more with every shot. Between rounds, she crouched in the shade, running a cloth over the barrel. Her hands shook slightly from adrenaline. The announcer was already hyping the next round. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, the finale you've been waiting for," he boomed. "The impossible target." Alyssa looked up sharply. "Impossible target?" She stood, slung the rifle back over her shoulder, and walked to the edge of the range with the others. There, mounted on a launch platform, was a small drone with orange wings folded tight. Beside it, a technician typed commands into a tablet. On a monitor, the flight path appeared. Loops, zigzags, dives, faster and more erratic than any clay pigeon. The bearded contractor whistled low. "No way," he muttered. "Even with perfect optics, that's a nightmare." Alyssa's heart pounded. She knew at once what this meant. Her broken rifle would have no margin for error. She'd have to rely purely on instinct. And she remembered her father's words from years ago. Sometimes the best rifle isn't perfect. It just teaches you to be perfect yourself. She closed her eyes and breathed out slowly, the jeers of the crowd fading to a dull hum. Tomorrow, this round would define everything. A hush fell over the firing line as officials wheeled the launch platform into place. On the big screen above the bleachers, a slow-motion preview of the impossible drone played on repeat, looping arcs, sudden dives, and blistering speed. Commentators called it the hardest marksmanship test ever staged, and virtually unhittable under competition conditions. Alyssa slid her cracked rifle onto the shooting bench and ran her thumb along the fracture in the stock. It had widened during the first 2 rounds. She could feel a hair-thin edge catching against her glove. She adjusted her scope and watched it wobble by a millimeter. Every competitor's gear had been tested under ideal conditions, but hers was hanging together by stubbornness and memory. "You don't have to do this," murmured a range marshal quietly, leaning toward her. "We can mark you as a withdrawal." "No shame." Alyssa looked up, her face calm but her eyes hard. "If I walk off now, it's over. I came here to shoot." The marshal nodded once and stepped back. The crowd sensed the drama and gathered closer. A group of competitors huddled nearby, whispering. "She won't even hit air," one snorted. "Broken gun, broken dreams." Another chuckled. Phones were raised, cameras zoomed. They wanted to catch the moment she failed. Alyssa ignored them. She unscrewed the scope entirely, set it aside on the bench, and flipped up the iron sights. If the scope wouldn't hold 0, she'd rely on her instincts and the math she'd trained for. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Glass can lie, steel doesn't." When her name was called, she stepped to the line, shoulders squared, rifle cradled like an extension of herself. The sun burned at her back. She could feel sweat dripping down her spine, but her breathing slowed until it matched her pulse. A loud beep signaled the launch. The drone burst skyward. It shot straight up, banked left, then zigzagged unpredictably, its orange wings flickering against the blue. Even with perfect optics, it was a nightmare target. Competitors before her had missed entirely, their bullets carving harmless arcs into the sky. Alyssa tracked it with her eyes, not her weapon, for a full 2 seconds, mapping its rhythm, predicting its path. Her fingers danced on the stock, compensating for the crack. She lowered her cheek to the iron sight and exhaled, long and steady. Breathe. Watch. Lead the target. She swung the muzzle ahead of the drone's path. In her mind, she overlaid invisible lines, wind speed, angle, velocity, the math she'd done 1,000 times on quiet afternoons at home. She wasn't just looking at the drone. She was looking at where it would be. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle cracked. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, 300 feet above the desert floor, the drone exploded in a shower of sparks and shattered rotors, pieces tumbling like confetti against the sky. The crowd gasped. The sound rippled outward in waves, then turned into a roar. People leapt to their feet, shouting and pointing. Camera crews swung their lenses skyward to catch the falling debris. On the screen above the bleachers, an instant replay zoomed in on Alyssa's shot. They played it back frame by frame. The muzzle flash, the bullet's trajectory, the drone erupting at the perfect moment. A bright red hit graphic flashed across the scoreboard. Even the commentators were stunned. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are seeing history," one said. Alyssa Ward just did the impossible. With a broken rifle, iron sights, and steady hands. Alyssa lowered the weapon slowly, her heart hammering, but her face composed. She flicked the safety on and slung the rifle across her back. Around her, the other competitors stared, mouths open. The bearded contractor who had mocked her earlier shook his head, muttering something under his breath. She walked off the line without a word, straight-backed, the way her father had taught her. Never gloat, never explain, let the shot speak for itself. Officials converged on the bench, inspecting the weapon, checking the footage for irregularities, measuring the distance, but the math didn't lie. She had done exactly what everyone said couldn't be done. Somewhere in the bleachers, a small girl in a pink baseball cap clutched her mother's arm and whispered, "She's like a superhero." Phones buzzed as social media feeds filled with clips labeled "Impossible Shot" and "Broken Rifle." Within minutes, Alyssa Ward was trending. She found a shaded spot at the far edge of the range and knelt, running a cloth along the rifle's barrel. Her hands trembled now that the moment had passed. She glanced at the cracked stock and gave a faint smile. "Still with me, old friend," she murmured to the weapon. "We're not done yet." In the distance, she could hear the crowd still roaring her name. For a long, suspended moment after the drone shattered, no one on the range moved. It was as if time had frozen at the apex of the impossible shot. Then the silence cracked open like thunder. The bleachers erupted. People leapt to their feet, cheering, whistling, stamping their boots on the wooden planks. Phones and cameras thrust into the air like 1,000 periscopes. On the giant LED screen, slow-motion replays rolled over and over, each time punctuated by graphics. Direct hit. Record breaker! Inside the commentator booth, 2 former military snipers stared at each other, their headsets momentarily forgotten. "That wasn't luck," one said finally. "That was calculation. Pure skill." "No one's ever hit that target before," the other replied. "Not in testing, not in practice." Down on the firing line, competitors who had been sneering now stood in awkward silence. Some shook their heads. A few clapped half-heartedly. Others muttered about beginner's luck, but couldn't tear their eyes away from the replay. The bearded contractor who had mocked Alyssa earlier removed his sunglasses, eyes narrowed in disbelief. "She tracked that drone like she had radar," he said under his breath. "She's been tracking targets since she was a kid," another competitor murmured. "We should have known." The judges huddled at a table near the podium, whispering urgently. They double-checked the footage from 3 angles, measured wind speeds, and even sent a technician to inspect Alyssa's rifle. When they found the cracked stock and missing scope, their disbelief deepened. "She did it with iron sights?" one judge said. "Impossible," another muttered, but the data didn't lie. Up in the VIP area, Journalists hammered out stories on tablets, headlines already taking shape. Broken rifle. Perfect shot. Young woman shocks military contest. Impossible drone hit on live stream. Social media exploded. Within minutes, Alyssa's name was trending across platforms. Clips of her shot were posted with dramatic music, freeze frames, and slow zooms. Hashtags flooded timelines. Impossible shot. Broken rifle. Alyssa Ward. Meanwhile, Alyssa sat alone under a patch of shade behind the range, rifle across her knees. Her hands were still trembling from the adrenaline, but her breathing was steady. She could hear the crowd chanting her name in waves. For a moment, she closed her eyes and remembered her father. He had passed away 2 years earlier, never seeing her compete at this level. But in her mind, she could hear his calm, low voice. "When the world doubts you, let the shot speak." She smiled faintly. "You'd like this one, Dad." A man in a blazer approached, holding a camera crew at bay with one hand. "Miss Ward, I'm Captain Daniel Ruiz, head judge. We're all, frankly, stunned. We'd like to interview you for the broadcast." Alyssa opened her eyes and stood. "Of course," she said quietly. They led her back to the podium, where the roar of the crowd swelled again. The host thrust a microphone toward her. "You just did what no one else here has done," he said, eyes bright. "With a broken rifle, without a scope. How?" Alyssa hesitated, then said simply, "I practiced with worse." The crowd erupted again. Cameras flashed. The host tried to press her for details, but she kept her answers short. She didn't want to explain the math or the countless hours of training. She wanted the shot to stand on its own. Behind the stage, representatives from major firearms brands, tactical gear companies, and even a sports drink sponsor lined up, business cards in hand. They saw not just a shooter but a story, an underdog hero who had captured the public imagination. "Miss Ward, we'd like to outfit you with a new rifle. We'll fly you to Europe for an exhibition match. Would you consider being the face of our—" She raised a hand gently. "Thank you, but not today." She walked past them all to the back exit, her old rifle slung across her shoulder. In the competitor tent, whispers turned to open conversation. "She's going to redefine the sport," one muttered. "She's dangerous," said another, meaning it as a compliment. A few exchanged glances. It was one thing to lose to a top-tier shooter with top-tier gear. It was another to be obliterated by someone with cracked wood and iron sights. By evening, news outlets had picked up the story worldwide. Headlines read like legend. Alyssa Ward's impossible shot inspires millions. They mocked her broken rifle. She broke records instead. Video of the shot hits 50 million views overnight. Clips showed slow-motion arcs of the bullet, computer simulations, reaction shots of stunned judges, and Alyssa walking off the line without even cracking a smile. That night, in her hotel room, Alyssa laid the rifle on the bed and stared at it. The wood stock was chipped, the barrel scratched, but it had been her companion through thousands of hours of practice. She ran her hand over the crack. "Still with me," she whispered. Her phone buzzed with hundreds of notifications. Messages from old friends, new fans, shooting clubs asking her to visit. She silenced it and set it face down. Out the window, the neon glow of Las Vegas flickered on the horizon, but in the quiet of her room, she felt strangely calm. She'd proven what she needed to prove. The rest, the fame, the sponsors, the headlines, was just noise. She picked up the rifle and began cleaning it, the familiar ritual grounding her. In her head, she planned the next day, a call to her mother, a visit to the veterans' range where she'd learned to shoot. And maybe, if she had time, a quiet moment at her father's old shooting bench. For the first time since the competition began, she let herself smile fully. Not for the cameras, not for the crowd, but for herself. The morning after the competition, the desert felt eerily still. The bleachers were empty, the banners torn down, and the launch pad where the drone had taken flight stood like a strange monument on the flat sand. A thin wind carried the scent of spent gunpowder away into the hills. Alyssa sat on the tailgate of a borrowed pickup truck, her rifle laid across her lap. She'd been there since dawn, watching the first light spill across the range where her life had changed overnight. In less than 12 hours, she had gone from unknown underdog to trending headline. Sponsors had left messages. A late-night host wanted her on his show. An action movie studio had even floated the idea of a cameo. She felt detached from it all. What mattered to her wasn't the flashbulbs or the offers. What mattered was the quiet click of the bolt sliding forward, the math of a lead, the simple thrill of getting it right. That was hers, no matter who was watching. A convoy of vehicles crunched across the gravel and stopped nearby. It was the competition's organizing committee and several military officials. At their center walked Captain Daniel Ruiz, the head judge from yesterday. He held a plaque under his arm, his face set in a serious expression. "Miss Ward," he said as he approached, "we'd like to formally recognize what you did yesterday." She slid off the tailgate and stood, brushing dust from her jacket. Ruiz handed her the plaque. Highest marksmanship score, and a new record for the event. "You're the first civilian competitor ever to win the grand finale." Alyssa took it, surprised by the weight. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ruiz hesitated, then added, "I've been doing this a long time. I've seen talent. I've seen lucky shots. What you did wasn't luck. It was different." He glanced at her cracked rifle. "You could have asked for a replacement weapon. We would have granted it, given the damage. Why didn't you?" She shrugged. "You can't always choose your tools," he smiled faintly. "That's going to stick with me." By mid-morning, journalists had found her again. Cameras clicked, mics thrust forward, questions fired rapid fire. "How did you learn to shoot like that? Will you join the military? Who inspired you?" "What's next for Alyssa Ward?" She answered sparingly, keeping her voice calm but warm. "I trained for years with imperfect equipment. I believe anyone can improve if they're willing to practice." When asked about future plans, she only said, "I'll keep shooting." One journalist asked if she planned to auction off the broken rifle as memorabilia. Alyssa glanced down at it, the crack running like a scar through the wood, and smiled. "This rifle isn't going anywhere." That afternoon, she returned home to her small town in Montana. The local airport had a handful of reporters waiting, but most of the faces she saw were neighbors and friends holding hand-painted signs. "Welcome home, Alyssa. Impossible shot." And "Proud of you." Kids from her high school archery club lined the walkway, clapping as she came through. She waved but kept her steps measured. Fame felt unreal, but the kids' faces, wide-eyed and inspired, felt real. She stopped to talk with them, crouching so she was at their level. "It's not about having the best gear," she told a boy clutching a worn-out air rifle. "It's about knowing your gear inside and out. Practice more than everyone else. Build confidence one shot at a time." Over the next few weeks, her inbox filled with invitations from all over the world. Elite shooting clubs, training camps, motivational conferences. But she surprised everyone by turning down the big sponsorships and instead launching something different. The Ward Initiative, a low-cost shooting and discipline program for underfunded youth, first responders, and veterans. The program emphasized fundamentals, math, breathing, and ethics over expensive equipment. Local businesses donated space. Retired instructors volunteered their weekends. Within a month, the classes had a wait list stretching into the next season. "It's not about turning kids into snipers," she explained at the opening ceremony. "It's about giving them focus, discipline, and confidence. Shooting is just the medium." Her story also sparked a broader conversation online about grit and gender in competitive marksmanship. Opinion pieces debated what her victory meant. Talk shows analyzed the footage frame by frame. People wrote to her saying she'd inspired them to try something new or to persevere when others mocked them. One evening, scrolling through messages at her kitchen table, she paused on a note from a young girl in Nebraska. "They told me girls can't shoot as well as boys. I watched you hit that drone and now I'm saving up for lessons. Thank you." Alyssa stared at the message for a long time, then smiled and replied, "You can do anything you train for. Stay focused." By the end of the year, she had become not just a shooting champion, but a cultural symbol of skill over spectacle. Journalists dubbed her the quiet shot because of her understated demeanor. At a veterans fundraiser, she auctioned off only one thing: a signed photograph of her and her father at their old range. Proceeds going to a scholarship fund for youth marksmanship programs. And through it all, she kept training with the same rifle, She replaced the cracked stock with another piece of wood from her father's workbench, but left the scar visible, a reminder of the day when everyone doubted her, and she proved them wrong. On a chilly winter morning, she returned to the Nevada range for a private event. No crowds, no cameras, just Alyssa, Captain Ruiz, and a few friends. They set up a simple target at 500 yards. She took a breath, lined up, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet punched the center of the target. Ruiz chuckled. "Still got it," he said. Alyssa lowered the rifle and smiled. Never lost it. 2 years passed. In that time, Alyssa Ward had gone from an anonymous competitor with a cracked rifle to a household name in marksmanship and focus training. Her Ward initiative had opened chapters in a dozen states, with veterans, first responders, and youth groups signing up faster than she could staff the classes. Yet, she remained the same. Quiet, focused, preferring early morning sessions at the range over television interviews. The rifle, now repaired but still bearing its scar, stayed with her every step of the way. She carried it like a talisman from her old life into her new one, an unexpected invitation. Snowy morning in January, a letter arrived from the Department of Defense. It wasn't another sponsorship or publicity gig. It was an invitation, or rather a challenge. They wanted her to demonstrate her skills at a classified training facility in the Southwest in front of top-tier instructors and foreign allies. The test would push even her limits. An evolving, AI-driven target designed to evade human aim, faster and more unpredictable than any drone she'd faced. At first, she thought about declining. She'd already proven her point. But then she remembered her father's voice. "Always test yourself. Complacency dulls your edge." So she said yes. The facility. The training site was buried in a canyon, ringed by tall sandstone cliffs. Instead of bleachers, there were observation decks with tinted glass. Instead of cheering crowds, there were generals, scientists, and seasoned operatives leaning over consoles. Captain Ruiz met her at the gate. His hair was grayer, but his eyes were just as sharp. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, half grinning. "This thing was built to humiliate even our best." "I've been humiliated before," Alyssa said. "I'll survive." He led her to a prep tent. Inside was her rifle, freshly cleaned and calibrated, but still with the same iron sights. She ran a hand along the stock and nodded to herself. "Still with me." The challenge. Instead of a single target, an array of autonomous drones zipped across the sky in swarms, each with shifting patterns. The system would pick one at random, mark it with a flicker of light, and then launch it into a frenetic, evasive pattern. Alyssa had only seconds to acquire and fire. Observers whispered about whether a human could even do it. High-speed cameras were set up, telemetry loaded. On a large screen, her pulse and breathing appeared as green lines. "Ready," she said softly. Back to basics. The first drone flashed, a burst of red LED. It bolted upward, zigzagged, doubled back. Alyssa didn't chase it with her scope. She moved her eyes first, predicted its path, felt the rhythm. She inhaled, exhaled, squeezed. Crack! The drone exploded in a blossom of sparks. A murmur went through the observation deck. Another flashed. Crack! Another hit. Third, fourth, each more erratic than the last. She adjusted her stance, recalculated angles, led the targets with fractions of a second to spare. By the fifth, even the AI controlling the drones began adding new maneuvers to outwit her. She still scored direct hits. Then came the phantom drone, a target designed to appear and disappear between two projected images, essentially teleporting across the sky. Even veteran instructors had failed to track it in practice runs. Alyssa's heart slowed. She let the crowd, the cameras, the technology fade from her mind. She was back in Montana at dusk, with her father adjusting her stance, telling her to feel where the bird would fly next, not just where it was. The phantom flickered, zipped, vanished, reappeared. She led an empty patch of sky and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. For an instant, nothing. Then a shudder, a burst of debris. The phantom drone fell in two pieces, its cloaking flicker collapsing as it plummeted. Silence from the deck. Then, thunderous applause and a few shocked laughs. Captain Ruiz was the first to reach her. I've seen snipers freeze in combat. I've seen pilots nail impossible maneuvers. But that, he shook his head. That was artistry, she shrugged, though a smile tugged at her mouth. Good math, steady hands. The generals filed out of the observation deck to shake her hand. One leaned close and said, "If you ever want to train our people full-time, name your price." She thanked them but declined. Her mission was bigger than one institution. Later, sitting alone on the canyon rim as the sun went down, Alyssa unpacked a small box she'd brought with her. Inside was a photograph of her and her father at their old shooting bench. She set it on the sandstone and whispered, "We did it." Her phone buzzed with messages. Journalists begging for comment, sponsors begging for a deal. She switched it off, letting the desert wind carry the silence. For the first time since the competition years ago, she felt completely at peace. She realized the impossible drone, the AI target, the accolades. None of it defined her. What defined her was the discipline, the math, the patience, the quiet hours when no one was watching. That was her legacy. By the time she returned to Montana, video of the phantom drone shot had already leaked. Millions watched, incredulous. The legend of Alyssa Ward, the woman who had twice done the impossible, grew larger than ever. But to the kids at her Ward Initiative classes, she was still just Coach Alyssa, patient and steady, insisting on proper breathing, sight alignment, and the courage to trust yourself even when mocked. Her old cracked rifle hung on the classroom wall above a sign that read, "It's not the tool. It's the training." And below it, in smaller letters, they mocked her broken rifle. Then she hit the impossible target. 5 years later, the name Alyssa Ward had become shorthand for something bigger than shooting. In news articles, motivational talks, and training manuals, her story was used as an example of calm under pressure, relentless preparation, and quiet excellence. The impossible shot wasn't just a headline anymore. It had entered the folklore of modern marksmanship. Inside the Ward Initiative's flagship training hall in Montana, a mural stretched from floor to ceiling. It showed a cracked rifle transforming into a shooting star, arcing across a deep blue sky. Below it, hundreds of kids practiced with air rifles, bows, and laser sim systems. Veterans coached them patiently, repeating the same mantras Alyssa's father had taught her. On one wall hung her original rifle, still scarred and scratched, framed in clear acrylic with the words, "Visitors who came to see it often found Alyssa herself sitting quietly among the students, adjusting a stance here, correcting a grip there, speaking softly about breathing and math rather than fame or medals." Alyssa's program had grown beyond shooting. It now included mindfulness training, physical fitness, and STEM workshops. The same principles that made her a world-class marksman, observation, anticipation, and calculation, were being taught to kids learning robotics, programming, and aviation. Former students went on to college scholarships, military service, or careers in engineering and emergency response. The rifle range had become a sanctuary for focus and resilience. Parents of anxious or restless teenagers reported seeing their children transform under the discipline. Veterans who felt adrift after service found purpose as instructors. The Ward Initiative became a model for other programs worldwide. On the anniversary of her father's death, Alyssa returned once again to the Nevada desert range where it all began. The bleachers were gone. A simple bronze plaque now marked the spot of the impossible shot. It read, "Here, on this range, Alyssa Ward hit the unhittable target and reminded the world that skill beats spectacle." She stood there at dawn, her repaired rifle slung over her shoulder, and placed a small bunch of wildflowers at the base of the plaque. She whispered a quiet thank you to her father, to the old rifle, and to the desert that had witnessed her transformation. Journalists still tried to lure her back into the limelight. They offered reality shows, branded gear, even a Hollywood movie based loosely on her story. She said no to almost all of it, granting only occasional interviews where she focused on the importance of discipline over celebrity. "I don't want to be remembered for a shot," she said once. "I want to be remembered for what that shot inspired." The quote went viral. It ended up on posters, mugs, and motivational slideshows. Back in Montana, a teenage girl named Sophia had become her star pupil. Like Alyssa at that age, Sophia had only a second-hand rifle and a fierce determination. She was quiet, analytical, and relentless in practice. Alyssa saw herself in the girl and began mentoring her personally. One cold morning, after Sophia nailed a particularly difficult moving target, Alyssa handed her the cracked stock of her old rifle. Not to keep, but to hold for a moment. "This isn't a trophy," she told Sophia. "It's a reminder. Everyone will tell you something's impossible. Your job is to decide if they're right." Sophia nodded, eyes wide. Years later, Alyssa's students would go on to achieve their own impossible feats, breaking marksmanship records, earning degrees, serving in humanitarian roles, building drones instead of shooting them. Each one carried a version of her mantra. It's not the tool. It's the training. Scholars studied her technique as a blend of science and instinct. Military instructors used her story to teach humility and adaptability. Her shot became a case study in leadership courses about preparation meeting opportunity. One autumn evening, as the sun dipped low behind the Rocky Mountains, Alyssa closed up the range after a long day of training. The kids had gone home, the veterans had locked the equipment rooms, and the air smelled of wood smoke from a distant cabin. She took her rifle from its case, lined up a simple paper target at 300 yards, and fired 3 shots. All 3 landed dead center. She set the rifle down and watched the sky shift from gold to deep indigo. She didn't need an audience. She didn't need a title. The shot was enough. She glanced at the plaque above the doorway, the one her students passed under every day. It read, "They mocked her broken rifle, then she hit an impossible flying target." Alyssa smiled softly and turned off the lights. Legacy secured by then. She'd become less a competitor and more a living legend, but she wore the role lightly. In the end, her legacy wasn't a single shot or even a string of victories. It was the thousands of steady hands she had trained, the lives she had touched, the proof she had offered that preparation, patience, and courage could break any limit. Somewhere far off, a flock of geese crossed the twilight sky. She tracked their path instinctively, then laughed at herself and went inside, closing the door on a lifetime of records but opening it to a future of students, ready to aim higher than anyone thought possible. Sometimes, the power isn't in the weapon, it's in the hands that wield it. If this story inspired you, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this.